Before Your Eyes is a game with a control scheme that I've never seen before. Instead of pressing buttons, waggling joysticks or holding down keys, you control the vast majority of the game by blinking. That's not a metaphor, by the way, I literally mean blinking. In order to play through the game, you've got to acquire a human face and hook it up to a webcam, which through technological wizardry can tell when you're blinking. So, to snap a picture with your camera, you have to close your eyes to literally act as the shutter. To examine something, you've got to blink and let your eyes refocus, suddenly revealing the image. And when you want to listen in to your parents in the other room, you've got to screw your eyes shut in real life to be able to concentrate on what they're saying. It's a really clever gimmick, but with one major caveat that the designers have built the entire game around. You can't always control when you blink, meaning that if you're not paying attention, and involuntarily close your eyes for just a second, you might be looking at a completely different scene once they open again. There are some beautiful moments in this game that you have to literally fight your body to try and fully experience, because once you blink, there's no going back. That moment and anything you've missed is lost forever. If you play Before Your Eyes the way it's intended to, your own body will betray you and constantly cut scenes short, cheating you out of story details, voice acting, and minigames. This ensures that it's basically impossible to experience the entire game, and you will go into the final moments of Before Your Eyes kicking yourself for all the moments you blink past, something that, weirdly, makes the ending so much better. This goes against everything we've been conditioned to believe about the way video games are supposed to be played. For years we've been told that you're not truly done with the game until you've unlocked the secret ending, replayed on New Game Plus, found all the collectibles, played through all the DLC, and aced the fishing minigame. So to find a title that does the exact opposite, and instead embraces not just its own brevity, but also the fact that you are likely to see everything, and ending up better for it, got me thinking about the nature of content, what it means to actually finish a game, and the dread of putting my real-life human face on the internet for you all to see. Stay tuned for that. I think we're in a real drought of games that feel like they have a proper conclusion. An ending to a game is more than just beating the final boss or seeing the credits, it's a culmination of everything you've experienced in it. Pokemon starts with you catching your first gladiator and ends with you becoming the greatest Pokemon trainer in the world. Portal is all about, I forget their name, but those holes in the wall, and it ends right about as you're mastering how to use them. In short, an ending is the point where you're happy putting a game down in the knowledge that you've had a full and rich experience with it, in the same way that once a movie's finished, it's over. You don't then have to watch Frodo do all the side quests he missed on his way back from Mordor. Far too many games, particularly in the AAA space, are either so utterly bloated with mindless distractions that even if we do reach the ending we're sick of them, or are designed to be infinite perpetual motion machines of content, trapping you in a never-ending cycle of daily quests, battle passes, and updates. In a world where finishing games is a luxury, and publishers never want them to end, we end up stuck in this weird limbo of unfinished titles we feel guilty about, and endless time vampires of doom that never truly satisfy us. By structuring games not around how much content we can squeeze out of them, but instead around experiences that feel rewarding to actually finish, not only will we enjoy them more, and probably save ourselves some money, but we'll also be able to free ourselves of the infinite hunger for more content. But I'll get back around to that. So, how can games create captivating conclusions that can close chapters convincingly? In other words, how can games create experiences that end satisfyingly and don't fall into the trap of just going on forever or ending up unfinished? Well, I think by far the most obvious way is to streamline games such that they can deliver a complete experience with no filler before players get either bored or distracted. Developing smaller games with a much narrower focus gives us the ability to explore a single concept or mechanic in its entirety within a single play session. Gorogoa, for example, is all about a single kind of puzzle, namely perspective ones involving blending various images together, as well as a single narrative theme of our lives being invisibly shaped by our past decisions. Because there are no other mechanics to introduce or for players to worry about, Gorogoa can focus on iterating and expanding upon this single type of puzzle in a variety of interesting ways until it's out of ideas, at which point there's nothing stopping it from transitioning elegantly into its finale. Bigger games with more ideas have to deal with the much more difficult decision of choosing to wrap up the game with design and story space left untouched, or taking the time to completely explore everything, which might lead to players getting bored and missing out on the ending. There Is No Game sacrifices unexplored design space for the sake of its story, even though there's lots more room for meta-comedy puzzles, and Baba Is You is meticulous in how it explores its soccer band coding premise, but the game is just too big and complicated for me to have finished it, in spite of how good it is. The beauty of a shorter game, however, is that it can allow for players to feel like they've completely mastered something and to reach the apex of achievement in a reasonable time frame. Getting 100% completion in, say, a Far Cry game is 20 hours of fun, followed by a 50-hour exercise exercise in pointless repetition that will totally sour you on the game. But seeing everything there is to see in, say, Grow Home, also technically a Ubisoft open world game, takes a fraction of the time and is just as rewarding. Short games are great at this. Pyre lets you master the intricacies of an entire sport, What Remains of Edith Finch lets you get to know an entire family history, and Hypnospace Outlaw lets you master an archaic user interface as well as an entire fictional culture, all in a tightly controlled handful of hours. By focusing exclusively on the main arc of the game and condensing it down into 1 or 2 play sessions, short games can onboard players quickly and much more effectively use callbacks and motifs because these ideas are always going to be in the forefront of the player's mind. Of course, that's not to say that short games have to be strictly linear and restrictive in order to have effective conclusions. A short hike offers players an incredible amount of freedom and world to explore whilst maintaining a very specific vibe and a single session length. The game gives you total freedom to explore Hawk's Peak, but uses golden feathers, each of which grants you an extra jump, to gate off each of the 3 major altitude zones. Rather than taking the easy way out and simply handing you golden feathers at predetermined points, a short hike sets you loose to find them for yourself, with there being at my count 5 different feathers that can be your first, each with their own little story attached, like buying one from a tour guide or helping this frog build sandcastles. And with each new map area you unlock, you'll get access to a handful of new little adventures, only around a third of which need to be completed to get you enough feathers to ascend. If a short hike was just a straight shot up the mountain or force you to collect all 20 golden feathers before letting you finish, then not only would it no longer be a short hike, but the game's themes of taking off the pressure and finding your own path, the rise to the surface once you reach the top, wouldn't be anywhere near as effective. I loved bouncing my way up to the frozen slopes with these cool flowers I found, but in doing so I totally missed out on a little plot arc with this moody bird who extorts you for feathers, and some feathers you can get by playing volleyball with this kid. A short hike was happy to let me miss that stuff, and in doing so, it vastly improved the pacing and made my hike feel much more personal. That said, streamlining and focusing down the whole experience does only work for certain kinds of games, usually ones with low mental overhead like platformers or walking sims that can onboard players quickly and can tightly control the dramatic arc, leading to a nice satisfying finish. However, for more complex games with greater mechanical scope, you've got to get a bit cleverer. One way that many games give players the feeling of having a complete experience, whilst also leaving the door open for deeper mechanical exploration, is to design with replayability in mind. Platinum games are usually fantastic at this. Most of their stuff clocks in at a respectable 8 to 12 hours, leading players on a rip-roaring ride of amazing feel-good spectacle, ending in a classic over-the-top finale to cap things off, which is more than enough for a lot of people to have fun muddling through. However, because Platinum are so good at designing deep combat systems, the first playthrough for some people is more like a tutorial, meaning that they can then go back to the game and experience it from a new perspective and on a completely different level, not just trying to get through fights, but chain together mega combos, win without getting hit, and nabbing the top rating, with a great endgame rank being your second stopping point for the game. Astral Chain doesn't even give you a ranking on the default difficulty, knowing that it's really only something for advanced players on their second playthrough to worry about, further enforcing this optional replayability structure. Replayability can also extend to the narrative side of games. Titles like Mass Effect force you to make a lot of mutually exclusive decisions that not only feel more meaningful to see resolved because they come at the expense of other choices, but also because they present you with a lot of what-if questions that you can answer by giving the series another playthrough. What if I played a different class? What if I chose the space racist instead of the human personification of white bread? What if I do Renegade instead of Paragon? And what if I romance someone who isn't Garrus for a change? Pfft, fat chance. These individual narrative changes are ultimately fairly minor on their own, but they eventually contribute to a game experience that feels wholly different from playthrough to playthrough. This is a philosophy that Inkle executes on perfectly. Their globe-trotting classic 80 Days and their newer Murder Sim Overboard are fairly simple in terms of the choices you're actually given, but because you make so many of them, and they all feed into each other, each playthrough feels like a totally distinct story, allowing even failures where you get lost in the Arctic or arrested for a murder you totally did to feel like a satisfying end, while still presenting the possibility of you having another go and taking a different path. Obviously, the poster child for a playable game being able to offer multiple satisfying endings comes from roguelikes and similar procedurally generated games. Done well, the random element can turn impersonal systems into a series of completely different stories. In Slipways, a strategy game without any other civilizations, each game's arc of starting off with nothing, nurturing your empire and watching it flourish can take on totally different shapes depending on the map generation and tech availability. In one game I made a bunch of proto-stars within my borders to power my densely packed empire, in another I was sorely lacking in food and so had to turn some people into nutrient paste, and in another one I spec'd heavily into a few luxury core worlds supported by impoverished outer systems. While each game began with a blank canvas of planets, luck and circumstance always meant that by the end of my 25-year office, I'd made an empire with real personality behind it, and it was very satisfying to look back on the thriving metropolis my initial crappy settlement had become once I'd forced them to work in a science lab studying the very nutrient paste they would eventually become. But it's not just replayability that defines the best roguelikes, it's them having a flexible ending, allowing players to experience as much of the game as they like before hopping off at the next exit. In Hades, for example, it takes around 20 hours of attempts to beat the final boss for the first time, and players who stop there will have had a full narrative experience as well as a nice journey towards mastery. Those who want to find out the intricacies of the plot, however, can keep playing for another 20 hours and reach the credits, then another 10 for a nice little epilogue. And total masochists who want to beat the final challenge will probably need to invest 100 or so hours before the game tells them, well done, you can stop playing now. Instead of leaving out players who can't commit to a triple-digit playtime, or shortchanging those who want to spend more time with the game, Hades lets players decide their own ending, allowing them to wrap up their time with the game without any guilt, while always leaving the door open for them to return. Post-game content, new game plus modes, epilogues and achievements, even if they're not presented as de facto endings, can all serve as a capstone for players who want to stick around in a game for a bit longer without forcing them to just collect all the hidden grains of rice for a fleeting feeling of accomplishment. The credits usually roll in Monster Hunter right before the game actually gets tough, meaning that newbies can drop out and call it a day having defeated an appropriately tough beastie like Zora Magdaros while still opening up high rank for hunters who want a bit more of a challenge. If you don't feel done with Skyrim after beating up Alduin, which, let's be honest, isn't that surprising, then the list of achievements is essentially a sightseeing tour of all the best questlines and activities like the guilds and Daedra shrines, giving you a guide of high quality stuff to go and do until your adventure has come to a natural conclusion. A personal favourite example of this flexible ending structure comes from Breath of the Wild, which tells players that whenever they feel they're ready to go and face Ganon, to just sort of go and do it. You can actually head to Hyrule Castle whenever you like, and its spooky red mist is a constantly visible reminder of your eventual final destination. This is a genius move, because it means that the game's ending will have the maximum possible effect, as it always arrives precisely when the player feels like they master the game and thus want the ending most. Importantly, the game also makes a point of saying that you don't need to find all the shrines, get all the collectibles, or even do all the divine beasts to beat the game, even going so far as to play a joke on people who get all the Korok seeds by giving them a useless golden poo. Why? Because ignoring the chance for an appropriately paced conclusion to your time with the game, in favour of ticking off boxes or maximising playtime, won't make the game better, it'll make it worse. We as gamers, both for financial and psychological reasons, are inexorably drawn to this idea of seeing absolutely everything a game has to offer before finishing it. We want to collect every item, do every side quest and get to max level, or it doesn't feel like we've gotten the most out of the game that we possibly could. But more often than not, this need for raw content above all else, and the fear of missing out on even a single megabyte of game, can have more negative consequences than positive ones. Which brings me on to Before Your Eyes. See, I told you I'll come back to it. A game about this very problem of obsessing so much over what we feel like we're owed that we miss out not just on what's in front of us, but the chance for a real ending. Before Your Eyes sees you playing as Benjamin Bryn, who has just died, and thanks to this wolf who lives in the afterlife, is currently reliving his own life in preparation for cosmic judgment. This is all revealed through various scenes that you can only interact with by blinking, causing new elements to resolve into focus or moving the story forwards in time, but never backwards. And as I mentioned earlier, the human propensity to involuntarily blink introduces a huge amount of stress to what appears to be an otherwise fairly gentle story. Whenever you see this metronome on the bottom of your screen, it means that whatever's happening right now will be over the moment you close your eyes, and so the game pushes you into frantically absorbing all the information you can before you blink, and the game moves on regardless. As the game progresses, individual scenes can turn into full-on staring contests with the game as you desperately fight it to remain in a particular moment so you can finish playing around with everything just in case it's important. The more you play of Before Your Eyes, the more it becomes not about what you have in front of you, but the paranoia of missing out, driving you to try ever harder not to blink and avoid the regret of not getting to see a scene end, not understanding the plot, or just plain not getting the experience you feel like you deserve. Luckily, this is exactly what Before Your Eyes wants you to feel. Okay, heads up, what follows are some moderate spoilers. I'm not going to give away the actual plot, but you really ought to experience the game for yourself. Go here if you want to skip any spoilers. As Before Your Eyes progresses, the time skipping and metronome prompts get ever more aggressive. There are even bits that play out your insecurities like this ominous corridor or a mysterious ringing phone that can't be fully viewed. They'll always remain just out of reach until you finally crack, leaving you to wonder what big important story detail you just missed out on and leaving entire plot details a mystery. It's not until the end of the game, and we're presented with the truth of the remarkable life Benny Bryn is recounting, that the core of the experience and the reason for doing this becomes clear. There's this beachside location that the game uniquely revisits a few times, and it's always a brilliant moment with your parents or with your best friend, with some fantastic visuals and beautiful writing. But the game is intent on distracting you with this minigame where you can rearrange the stars into the cryptic message, "Stay here." I was so buzzing with the idea that this might be the key to hidden secrets and determined to follow the instructions and stick around in the scene for as long as possible that I actually injured my human eyes doing so, and as a result, could not tell you what happens in this scene. If that's not a perfect representation of the whole game's ethos, then I don't know what is. We can fight so hard to do everything that we feel like we're supposed to do, to see and experience everything we feel like we're supposed to see, that we end up making ourselves miserable chasing a cookie-cutter 100% completion, and not appreciating the incomplete but unique and much more personal experience that we've already got, even if it is shorter than we might like.
Hey, what are you looking at? Don't look up there. Look at me. I'm talking to you.
Content isn't everything. Not in video games, and not in real life either. It's impossible to do everything in life. There will always be those unavoidable moments that we never get to experience, those bits of life that we'll never get back because we were doing something else, were distracted, or just didn't get to see because we were blinking. But that doesn't invalidate the worth of everything else we've seen and achieved, and that all-consuming need for more content will only ruin the inevitable ending if we let it. If having an emotionally fulfilling ending and completing all the content happen to line up in a short game or one you truly love, then that's great, but we shouldn't feel obligated to chase an idealized finale just because there's more left we could do. In the new Pokemon Snap, I felt compelled to get a picture of every Pokemon in every position and max out the score on every course, because I love Pokemon. But eventually, this rule turned into a burden and I began to resent the game for wasting the time that I'd willingly surrendered to it. Now it sits on the pile of unfinished games, judging me forever. I wanted to see the secret 100% completion ending in Batman Arkham Knight, so I spent an ungodly amount of time doing the horrible Riddler Trophy Collectathon, only to get a fairly boring cutscene for my troubles, and feeling like I'd wasted my life. This impulse to pursue content over meaningful gameplay is something we need to be on constant watch for, least of all because a variety of publishers are all too eager to take advantage of it. The likes of Fortnite and its perpetually evolving story, as well as the infinite grind of its battle pass, compel you to keep playing with the implicit threat of missing out on cosmetics, XP, or the next meta plot event, even though, in the grand scheme, they don't really matter. And more, companies are deliberately baking in microtransactions and gacha mechanics to either let you skip their deliberate grind or to withhold full completion from you, making you pay out the nose just for the privilege of saying you've done everything. And more generally, we need to stop approaching games as simple hours of content per dollar calculations. While paying less money for a longer game feels more efficient and gives us more delicious content, this practice encourages developers to add pointless busywork and pad out the pacing of their games just to avoid people complaining that it's too short. More importantly, trying to bleed all of the content out of a 100-hour game that's really only got 20 hours of quality time in it will only sabotage your enjoyment and sense of accomplishment in the long run. Before Your Eyes only has about 90 minutes of content in it, which for £8 doesn't really seem worth it. But each moment of game was so perfectly made and arrived at such a pitch-perfect conclusion at just the right time that it stuck with me for weeks, far more than other games I've put more than 10 times that amount of money into. Sure, I could go back to it and explore all the narrative paths I missed, or see if that hidden message really was the key to a hidden ending, but I think doing so would miss the point of my time with the game. It was short, incomplete, and riddled with things I wish I'd done differently. But those nuances and gaps made my time with the game much more personal, much more meaningful, and in the end, much more enjoyable. And isn't that ultimately the point? So many games offer infinite experiences that never end for no money at all, but without exception, these games will either never truly satisfy, are only out to drain your wallet, or sometimes both. By looking past our basest instincts to optimize the fun not just out of video games, but our entire lives, and accept life's imperfections and unfinished things in all their glory, we can free ourselves from the yoke of turning art and fun into just another job. It's okay to leave things unfinished. It's okay to close your eyes, take a moment, and let the rest of the world pass by. And it's okay to realize that I never did get around to showing you my face. So long as when all's said and done, you have an ending that feels like you earned it, regardless of how long it took. Hello, and thanks for 100% completing this extra length video. It means a lot. This is the part of the video where we kick back, relax, and chat about some things I'd like to shout out, as well as my lovely patrons. First up, a shout out to a cool YouTuber, that being Shadow at Noon, creator of that head empty no thoughts music playlist that's been staring at you from your recommended feed, as well as a bunch of other themed Nintendo music playlists. These things are brilliantly spliced together and have served as my go-to background music when editing for a few months. They're an absolute godsend, just maybe don't tell Nintendo's lawyers, okay? Next, a shout out to my cool ass patrons, who, as thanks for supporting the channel, get bonus content, early access to videos, and my eternal permission to ad block my videos. Seriously, $1 a month on Patreon is worth literally thousands upon thousands of views. It's a much better way to support the channel. Of course, if you're generous enough to give me $10 a month, like these fine folk, I'll also give you a special shout out. Those people are Alex Vieira, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Alsakav, Brennan Spaulding, Brian Atariani, Konstantina Punkt, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, DJ Daniel, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Evie, Gazkul, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dylan Riddle, James Andrew Adams, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, George Aria Navarro, Kai Gillespie, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Powell Yaroz, Phoenix Thurikaz, Philby the Bilby, Reddedex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tyler Duncan, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Right, I won't keep you any longer, stay cool out there, and I will see you around. Bye!